A man may dream of setting himself free from all the bonds of society, free to be their true self. But when you do that, you may not like what you see. Cloak of Anarchy by niven. Read by Karl. Square in the middle of what used to be the San Diego Freeway, I leaned back against a huge twisted oak. The old bark was rough and powdery against my bare back. It was dark green shade shot with light parallel beams of white gold. Long grass tickled my legs. 40 yards away across a wide strip of lawn was a clump of elms, and a small grandmotherly woman sitting on a green towel. She looked like she'd grown there. A stalk of grass protruded between her teeth. I felt we were kindred spirits. Once, when I caught her eye, I wiggled a forefinger at her, and she waved back. In a minute now, I had to be getting up. Jill was meeting at the Wilshire exit in half an hour. But I started walking at the Sunset Boulevard ramps, and I was tired. A minute more. It was a good place to watch the world rotate. Good day for it, too. No clouds at all. On this hot, blue summer afternoon, Kingsbury Park was as crowded as it ever gets. Some at police headquarters had expected that. Twice the normal number of cops' eyes floated overhead, watching. Gold dots against blue, basketball size, 12 feet up. Each a television eye and a sonic stunner. Each a hookup to police headquarters. They were there to enforce the law of the park. No violence. No hand to be raised against another, and no other laws whatsoever. Life was often entertaining in a free park. North towards sunset, a man carrying a white rectangular sign, blank on both sides. He was parading back and forth in front of a square-jawed youth on a plastic box who was trying to lecture him on the subject of fusion power and the heat pollution problem. Even this far away, I could hear the conviction and dedication in his voice. South, a handful of yelling marksmen were throwing rocks at a cop's eye, distracted by a gesticulating man with wild black hair. The golden baseball was dodging the rocks, but barely. Some cop was baiting them. I wonder why they got the rocks. Rocks were scarce in Kingsbury Park. The black-haired man looked familiar. I watched him when his horde chasing the cop's eye. I'd forgotten when the girl walked out of a clump of elms. She was lovely. Long, perfect legs, deep red hair worn longer than shoulder length, the face of an arrogant angel, and a body so perfect it seemed unreal, like an adolescent's daydream. Her walk showed training. Possibly she was a model or dancer. Her only garment was a cloak of glowing blue velvet. It was 15 yards long, that cloak. It drove back from two big gold discs that were stuck somehow to the skin of her shoulders. It trailed back and back, floating a height of about 5 feet all the way, twisting and turning to trace her path through the trees. She seemed like the illustration in a book of fairy tales. Bear in mind, the original fairy tales were not intended for children. Neither was she. You could hear neck vertebrae popping all over the park. Even the rocks there was the stuff to watch. She could sense the attention, or hear it in the whisper of sighs. It was what she was here for. She strolled along with a condescending angel smile in her angel face, not overdoing the walk, but letting it flow. She turned regardless of whether there were obstacles to avoid, so that 15 yards of flowing cloak could follow the curve. I smiled, watching her go. She was lovely from the back, with dimples. The man who stepped out to her a little further on was the same who had led the rock flowers. Long black hair and beard, hollow cheeks and deep-set eyes. A different smile and a different walk. Ron Cole, of course. Didn't hear what he said to the girl in the cloak, but I saw the result. He flinched and turned away abruptly and walked away with his eyes on his feet. I got up and moved to interrupt him. Don't take it personally, I said. He looked up, startled. His voice, when it came, was bitter. How should I take it? She'd have turned away any man the same way. That lady has staples in her navel. She's to look at, not to touch. You know her? Never saw her before in my life. Then, her cloak. You must have noticed her cloak. The tail end of her cloak was just passing us, its folds rippling in a possibly deep, rich blue. Ron and Cole smiled as though if it hurt his face. Yeah. All right. Well, suppose you made it pass. Suppose the lady liked your looks and took you up on it. What would she do next? Bearing in mind she can't stop walking even for a second. Thought it over first and asked, why not? If you stop walking, she loses the whole effect. Her cloak just hangs there like some sort of tail. It's supposed to wave. She lies down with you is even worse. A cloak floating at 5 feet, a sweeping in a clump of bushes and bobbing frantically. Ron laughed helplessly. I said, see? Her aims would get the giggles. That's not what she's after. He sobered. But she really wanted to. She wouldn't care about... Oh, right. She must have spent a fortune to get that effect. Sure, she wouldn't ruin it for Casanova himself. I thought unfriendly thoughts towards the girl in the cloak. There are polite ways to turn down a pass, while Cole was easy to hurt. I asked, "Where'd you find the rocks?" "Rocks?" "Oh, we found a place where the central divider shows through. We knocked out some chunks of concrete." Ron looked down the length of the park just as the kid bounced a missile off a golden ball. "They got one. Come on." The fastest commercial shipping never sailed was the clipper ship. Yet the world stopped building them after just 25 years. Steam had come. Steam was fast, safe, more dependable, cheaper in time and men. The freeway served America for almost 50 years. Then modern transportation systems cleaned the air and made traffic jams archaic and left the nation with an embarrassing problem. What to do with 10,000 miles of unsightly, abandoned freeways? Kings Free Park had been part of the San Diego Freeway, the section between Sunset and the Santa Monica interchange. Decades ago, the concrete had been covered in topsoil. The border had been landscaped from the start. Now the park was as thoroughly covered in green as the much older Griffith Free Park. Within Kings Free Park was an orderly approximation of anarchy. People were searching the entrances. There were no weapons inside. The cop's eyes, pointing ahead and out of reach, were the next best thing to no law at all. There was only one law to enforce. All attempts at attempted violence carried the same penalty for attacker and victim. When anyone raised his hand against his neighbor, and one of the golden basketballs would stun them both. They would wake separately, with cop's eyes watching. It was usually enough. Naturally, people threw rocks at cop's eyes. It was a free park, wasn't it? "They got one. Come on." Ron tugged at my arm. The fallen cop's eye was hidden, surrounded by those who destroyed it. I hoped they don't kick it apart. I told them I needed it intact, but it might not stop them. It's a free park, and they bagged it. With my missiles. Who are they? I don't know. They were playing basketball when I found them. I told them I needed a cop's eye, and they said they'd get me one. I remember Ron quite well now. Ron Cole was an artist and an inventor. Would have been two sources of income for another man, but Ron was different. He invented new art forms. Well, solder and wire and diffraction gratings and several makes of plastic kits, and an incredible collection of serendipitous junk, Ron Cole made things the like of which had never been seen on Earth. The market for new art forms had always been low, but now and then he did make a sale. It was enough to keep him in raw materials, especially since many of his raw materials came from basements and attics. There was an occasional big sale, and then, briefly, he'd be rich. There was this about him. He knew who I was, but I hadn't remembered my name. Ron Cole embarrassing to think about the what name belonged with whom. A name was only a tag and a conversational gambit. "Russell, how are you?" A signal. Ron had developed a substitute. In a momentary gap in the conversation, he would say, "Look at this," and hold out miracles. Once it had been a clear plastic sphere, golf ball shaped, balanced on a polished silver concavity. When the ball rolled around the curved mirror, the reflections were fantastic. Once it had been a twisting sea serpent engraved on a Michelob beer bottle, the lovely vase-shaped bottle of the early 1960s that was too big for standard fridges. And once it had been two strips of dull silvery metal, unexpectedly heavy. "What's this?" I held them in the palm of my hand. They were heavier than lead. Platinum. But nobody carries that much platinum around. Joking, I'd asked, "U-235? Are they warm?" he asked apprehensively. I sort of fought an urge to throw them as far as I could and dive behind a couch. But they had been platinum. Never did learn by Ron and me carrying them about. Something that didn't pan out. When in a semicircle of spectators, the felled cop's eye lay on the grass. It was intact, possibly because two cheerful, conspicuously large men were standing over it, waving everyone back. "Good," said Ron. He knelt above the golden sphere, turned it with his long artist's fingers. He said, "Help me get it open." "What for? What are you after?" "I'll tell you in a minute. Help me get..." Never mind. The hemispherical cover came off. For the first time ever, I looked into a cop's eye. It was impressively simple. Picked out the stunner by its parabolic reflector, the cameras, and a toroidal coil that had to be part of the floater device. No power source. I guess the shell itself was a power beam antenna. With the cover cracked, there'd be no way for a damn fool to electrocute himself. Ron knelt to study the strained guts of the cop's eye. From his pocket, he took something made of glass and metal. Some remember my existence handed out to me, saying, "Look at this." I took it, expecting a surprise, and when I got it, it was an old hunting watch, a big wind-up watch on a chain with a protective case. They were in common use a couple of 100 years ago. Looked at the face and said, 15 minutes slow. Didn't repair the whole works, did you? Oh, no. He clicked the back open for me. The works looked modern, I guessed. Battery and tuning fork? That's what the guard thought. Of course, that's where I made it from. But the hands don't move. I set them just before they searched me. Aha, what does it do? If I work it right, I think it'll knock down every cop's eye in Kingsbury Park. For a moment or so, I was laughing too hard to speak. Ron watched me with his head at one side, clearly wondering if he thought he was joking. I managed to say, that ought to cause all kinds of excitement. Ron nodded vigorously. Of course, it all depends on whether they get the kind of circuits I think they use. Look for yourself. The cop's eyes aren't supposed to be foolproof. They're supposed to be cheap. If one gets knocked down, the taxes don't go up much. The other way is to make them expensive and foolproof and frustrate a lot of people. People aren't supposed to be frustrated in a free park. So, what is a cheap way to make the circuit safe for the whole system? If you did that way, I can blow the whole thing. We'll see. Ron pulled thin copper wire from the cuffs of his shirt. How long will that take? Oh, half an hour. That decided me. I'm going to be going. I'm meeting Jill Hayes at the Wilshire exit. You've met her. Big blonde girl, my height. But he wasn't listening. Okay, see you, he muttered. He began placing the copper wire inside the cop's eye with tweezers. I left. Crowds tend to draw crowds. A few minutes after leaving Ron, I joined a semicircle of the curious to see what they were watching. A balding, lantern-jawed individual was putting something together. An archaic machine with blades and a small gasoline motor. The T-shaped wooden handle was brand new and unpainted. The metal parts were dull, with a look of ancient rust recently removed. The crowd speculated in harsh whispers. What was it? A part of a car, not an outboard motor, though it had blades. Too small for a motor scooter, too big for a motor skateboard. Lawnmower, said the white-haired lady next to me. She was one of those small bird-like people who shrivel and grow weightless as they age and live forever. Her words meant nothing to me. I was about to ask when the lantern-jawed man finished his work and twisted something, and the motor started with a roar. Black smoke puffed out. In triumph, he gripped the handles. Outside, it was a prison offense to build a working internal combustion machine. Here, with a fire of dedication burning in his eyes, he waved his infernal machine across the grass. He left it pass as flat as a rug. It was a free park, wasn't it? The smell hit everyone at once. A black dirt in the air, a stink of half-burned hydrocarbons attacking nose and eyes. I gasped and coughed. Never smelled anything like it. The crescent of crowd roared and converged. He squawked when he picked up his machine. Someone found a switch and stopped it. Two men confiscated his toolkit and went to work with a screwdriver and hammer. The owner objected. He picked up a heavy pair of pliers and tried to commit murder. A cop sized at them and the man with a hammer, and they both hit the lawn without bouncing. The rest of them pulled the lawnmower apart and bent and broke to pieces. I'm half sorry they did that, said the old man. Sometimes I miss the sound of lawnmowers. My dad used to mow the lawn on Sunday mornings. I said, it's a free park. Then why can't he build anything he pleases? He can. He did. Anyway, he's free to build. We're free to take apart. And my mind flashed, like Ron's rigged cop's eye. Ron was good with tools. Not surprised me a bit if he knew enough about cop's eyes to knock out the whole system. Maybe someone ought to stop him. But knocking down cop's eyes wasn't illegal. It happened all the time. It was part of the freedom of the park. If Ron can knock them all down at once, well, maybe someone ought to stop him. I passed a flock of high school girls, all chirping like birds, all about 16. Might have been their first trip inside a free park. I looked back because they were so cute, and caught them staring in awe and wonder at the dragon at my back. A few years and they'd be too blasé to notice. It has taken Jill almost half an hour to apply it this morning. A glorious red and gold dragon breathing flames across my shoulder, flames that seemed to glow by their own light. Lower down were a princess and a knight in golden armor, the princess tied to a stake, the knight fleeing for his life. I smiled back at the girls, and two of them waved. Short blonde hair and golden skin, the tallest girl in sight, wearing not even a nudist shoulder pouch. Jill Hayes stood squarely in front of the Wilshire entrance, visibly wondering where I was. It was 5 minutes after 3. There was this about living with a physical culture nut. Jill insisted on getting me into shape. The other exercises were part of that. So was this business of walking half the length of Kingsbury Park. I balked at doing it briskly, though. Who walks briskly in a free park? too much to see. She'd given me an hour. I'd held out for 3. It was a compromise, like the paper slacks I was wearing despite Jill's nudist beliefs. Sooner or later, she'd find someone with muscles, or I'd relapse into laziness, and we'd split. Meanwhile, we got along. Seemed no way sensible to let her finish my training. She spotted me, yelled, "Russell, here!" in a voice that must have reached both ends of the park. In answer, I lifted my arm semaphore style, slowly over my head and back down. And every cop sign in Kings Free Park fell out of the sky, dead. Jill looked about her at all the startled faces and all the golden bubbles resting in bushes and on the grass. She approached me somewhat uncertainly. She asked, "Did you do that?" I said, "Yeah." To wave my arms at them and they all go back up. "I think you better do it," she said primly. Jill had a fine poker face. I waved my arm grandly over my head and down, but of course the cop's eyes stayed where they'd fallen. Jill said, "I wonder what happened to them." It was Ron Cole. You remember him? He's the one who engraved some old nickel and beer bottles for Steuben. Of course, but how? We went off to ask him. A brawny college man howled and charged past us at a dead run. We saw him kick a cop's eye like a soccer ball. The golden cover split, but the man howled again and hopped up and down, honking his foot. We passed dented golden shells and broken resonators and twisted parabolic reflectors. One man looked fresh and proud. He was wearing several of the golden toroids as bracelets. A kid was collecting the cameras. Maybe he thought he could sell them outside. Never saw an intact cop's eye after the first minute. They weren't all busy kicking cop's eyes apart. Jill stared at the conservatively dressed group carrying population by population signs and wanted to know if they were serious. Their grim-faced leader handed over pamphlets that spoke of the evil of the blasphemy of man's attempts to alter himself through gene tampering and extrauterine growth experiments. If it was a put-on, it was a good one. We passed 7 little men, each 3 to 4 feet high, traveling with a single tall, pretty brunette. They wore medieval garb. We both stared, but I was the one who noticed the makeup and the use of untan. American pygmies, probably part of a UN-sponsored tourist group, and the girl must be their guide. Ron Cole was not where I left him. He must decide that discretion is the better part of cowardice. Maybe right, too, I surmised. No one's ever knocked down all the cop's eyes before. It's not illegal, is it? Not illegal, but excessive. They can ban it for the park at the very least. Jill stretched in the sun. She was all golden and big. Scaled down, she made a nice center shot for a man's video zine. She said, "I'm thirsty. Is there a fountain about?" "Sure, unless someone's plugged it by now. It's a free park." "You mean to tell me they won't even protect the fountains?" "They make one exception. It's like a wedge. When someone ruins a fountain, they wait and fix it that night. That way, if I see someone trying to wreck a fountain, I generally throw a punch at him. A lot of us do. After a guy lost enough of his holidays to the cop's eye skinners, he'll get the idea sooner or later." The fountain was a solid cube of concrete with 4 spigots and a hand-sized metal button. It was hard to jam, hard to hunt. Ron Cole stood near it, looking lost. He seemed glad to see me, but still lost. Introduced him. "You remember Joe Hayes," he said. "Certainly. Oh, Joe." Having put her name to its intended purpose, but I probably forgot it. Joe said, "We thought you'd make a break for it." I did. "Oh?" "You know how complicated exits are. They have to be, to keep anyone from coming into an exit with a shotgun." Ron ran both hands to his hair without making it any more or less neat. "Well, all the exits stopped working. They must be on the same circuits as the cop's eyes. Wasn't expecting that." "They were locked in," I said. That was irritating. But underneath, the irritation was a funny feeling in the pit of my stomach. "How long do you think?" "No telling. They'll have to get new cop's eyes in somehow, and repair the beam power system and figure out how I bollocksed it and fix it so it doesn't happen again. I suppose someone must have kicked my rigged cop's eyes to pieces by now, but the police don't know that." "Well, they'll just send in some cops," said Jill. "Look around you." There were pieces of cop's eye in all directions. Not one remained whole. The cop would have to be out of his mind to enter a free park. Not to mention the damage to the spirits of the park. "Wish I'd brought a bag lunch," said Ron. I saw the cloak off to my right, a vision of glowing blue velvet hovering at 5 feet like a carpeted path in the air. Didn't yell or point or anything. For Ron, it might be pushing the wrong buttons. Ron didn't see it. "Anyway, I'm kind of glad this happened," he said animatedly. I always thought that anarchy ought to be a viable form of society. Jill made polite sounds of encouragement. After all, anarchy is only the last word of free enterprise. What can the government do for people that people can't do for themselves? Protection from other countries? If all the other countries are anarchies too, you don't need armies. Police maybe, but what's wrong with privately owned police? Fire departments used to work that way, Jill remembered. They were hired by the insurance companies. They only protected the houses that belonged to their own clients. Right, so you buy theft and murder insurance, and the insurance companies hire a police force. The client carries a credit card. Suppose the robber steals the card too. He can't use it. Doesn't have the right retina prints. But if the client doesn't have the credit card, he can't stick the cops on the thief. Oh, a noticeable pause. Well, half listening, for I'd heard all before, I looked for the endpoints of the cloak. I found empty space at one end and a lovely red-haired girl at the other. She was talking to two men as outre as herself. One can get the impression that Free Park is one gigantic costume party. It isn't. Not one person in town was wearing anything but street clothes, but the costumes are what get noticed. These guys were part bird. Their eyebrows and eyelashes were tiny feathers, green on one, golden on the other. Large feathers covered their heads, blue and green and gold, and round the crest down their spines. They were bare to the waist, showing physiques Joe would find acceptable. Vaughn was lecturing. What does the government do for anyone except the people who run the government? Once they were a private post office. They were cheaper than we've got now. Anything the government takes over gets more expensive immediately. There's no reason why private enterprise can't do anything the government... Jill gasped. She said, "Oh, how lovely." Ron turned to look. As if on cue, the girl in the cloak slapped one of the feathered men hard across the mouth. She tried to hit the other one, but he caught her wrist. Then all three froze. See? Nobody wins. He doesn't even like standing still. See? And I realized why they weren't moving. In a free park, it's easy for a gold to tell an offer. If the guy won't take no for an answer, he gets slapped. The stun bean gets him with the girl. When she wakes up, she walks away. Simple. The girl recovered first. She gasped and jerked her wrist loose and turned to run. One of the feathered men didn't bother to chase her. He simply took a double handful of the cloak. This is getting serious. The cloak jerked her sharply backward. She didn't hesitate. She reached for the big gold disc on her shoulders, ripped and loosed, and ran. The feathered men chased her, laughing. The redhead wasn't laughing. She was running all out. 2 drops of blood ran down her shoulders. Thought of trying to stop the feathered men, decided in favor of it, but they were already past. The cloak hung like a carpeted path in the air, empty at both ends. Jill hugged herself uneasily. Ron, just how does one go about hiring your private police force? Well, you kind of expect it to form spontaneously. Let's try the entrances. Maybe we can get out. It was slow to build. Everyone knows what a cop's eye did. Nobody thought it through. 2 feathered men chasing a lovely newt? A pretty sight, and why interfere? If she didn't want to be chased, she needed only... what? Nothing else had changed. The costumes, the people with causes, the people looking for causes, the people watchers, the pranksters. Blank Sign had joined the population by copulation faction. His grass-stained pink street tunic jarred strangely with their conservative suits, but he showed no sign of mockery. His face was as preternaturally solemn as theirs. Nonetheless, they did not seem glad of his company. It was crowded near the Wilshire entrance. Saw enough bewildered and frustrated faces to guess it was closed. The little vestibule area was so packed, I couldn't try to find out what was wrong with the doors. I don't think we ought to stay here, Jill said uneasily. I noticed the way she was hugging herself. Are you cold? No, she shivered, but I wished I were dressed. How about a strip of that velvet cloak? Good. We were too late. The cloak was gone. It was a warm September day, near sunset. Clad only in paper slacks, I was not cold in the least. I said, "Take my slacks." "No, hon, I'm the nudist." But Jill hugged herself with both arms. "Here," said Ron, and handed her his sweater. She flashed him a graceful look, then, curly embarrassed, she wrapped the sweater around her waist and knotted the sleeves. Ron didn't get it at all. I asked him, "Do you know the difference between nude and naked?" He shook his head. "Nude is artistic. Naked is defenseless." Nudity was popular in the Free Park. That night, nakedness was not. There must have been pieces of a cloak all over King's Free Park. So at least 4 that night. 1 worn as a kilt, 2 being used as a crude sarong, and 1 as a bandage. On a normal day, the entrance to King's Free Park closed at 6. Those who want to stay as long as they like. Usually there are not many, because there are no lights to be broken in a free park, but light does seep in from the city outside. The cops' eyes float about, guided by infrared, but most of them are not manned. Tonight will be different. It's after sunset, but still light. A small and ancient lady came slipping toward us with a look of murder on her lined face. First I thought it was meant for us, but that wasn't it. She was so mad she couldn't see straight. She saw my feet and looked up. "Oh, it's you. The one who hoped to break the lawnmower," she said, which was unjust. "A free park, is it?" "A free park. Two men just took away my dinner." I spread my hands. "I'm sorry, I really am. If you still had it, we could talk you into sharing it." She lost some of her man, which brought her embarrassingly close to tears. Then we're all hungry together. I brought in a plastic bag. "Next time I use something this and transparent, by damn." She noticed Jill in her improvised sweater skirt and added, "I'm sorry, dear. I gave my towel to a girl who needed it even more. Thank you, anyway. Please, may I stay a few people until the cops start working again? I don't feel safe somehow. I'm Glenda Hawthorne." We introduced ourselves. She shook our hands. By now it was quite dark. We couldn't see the city beyond the high green hedges, but the change was starting when the lights of Westwood and Santa Monica flashed on. The police were taking their own good time getting us some cop's eyes. We reached the grassy field sometimes used by a society for creative anarchism for their tournaments. They fight on foot with weighted and padded weapons designed to behave like swords, broads, axes, morning stars, etc. The weapons are bugs so they don't fall into the wrong hands. The field is big and flat and bare of trees, sloping upwards on the edges. Along the slope something moved. It stopped. It didn't move again, but it showed clearly in light reflected down from the white clouds. It met with something man-shaped and vaguely pink and a pale rectangle nearby. I spoke low. "Stay here." Jill said, "Don't be silly. Nothing for anyone to hide under. Come on." The blank sign was bent and marked with shoe prints. The man who carried it looked up at us with pain in his eyes. Drying blood rushed from his nose. With us, he whispered, "I think I dislocated my shoulder." "Let me look." Jill bent over him. She probed him a bit, then set herself and pulled hard and steadily on his arm. Blank sign yelled in pain. "That'll do it," Jill said, unsatisfied. "How's it feel?" "Doesn't hurt as much." He smiled, almost. "What happened?" "They started pushing me and kicking me to make it go away." "I was doing it. I was walking away, I was. The ones the sons of bitches snapped away my sign." Stopped for a moment and went off at a tangent. Wasn't hurting anyone with my side. I'm a psych major. Writing a thesis when people read into a blank sign, like the blank sheets in the Rorschach tests. "What kind of erections do you get?" "Usually hostile. Nothing like that." Black sign sounded bewildered. "Wouldn't you think a free park is the one place you'd find freedom of speech?" Jill wiped his face with his tissue from Glenda's purse. She said, "Especially when you're not saying anything. Hey, Ron, tell me more about your government by anarchy." Ron cleared his throat. "Hope we're not judging it by this. Kingsbury Park hasn't been an anarchy for more than a couple of hours. It needs time to develop." Glenn and Hawthorne and Blank Sign must have wondered what the hell he was talking about. I wished him joy in explaining it to them and wondered if he would explain who had not knocked down the cop's eyes. The field would be a good place to spend the night. It was open, with no cover and no shadows, no way for anyone to sneak up on us. We lay on wet grass, sometimes dozing, sometimes talking. Two other groups no bigger than us occupied the jousting field. They kept their distance, we kept ours. Now and then we heard voices, and knew they were not all asleep. Not all at once, anyway. Blank Sign dozed restlessly. His ribs were giving him trouble, though Joe said none of them were broken. Every so often he whimpered and tried to move and woke himself up. Then he had to hold himself still until he fell asleep again. "Money," said Joe. "It takes the government to print money. But you can get IAUs printed. Standard denominations, printed for free and notarized. Back made a good name." Jill laughed softly. "Thought of everything, haven't you? Couldn't travel very far that way. Credit cards, then." I'd stopped believing in Ron's anarchy. I said, "Ron, remember the girl in the long blue cloak?" A little gap of silence. "Yeah?" "Pretty, wasn't she? Fun to watch?" "Yeah, granted. If there weren't any laws to stop you from raping her, she'd been muffled to the ears in a long dress and wearing a tear gas pen. What fun would that be?" "I liked the nude look. Look how fast it disappeared after the cop's eyes fell." said Ron. The night was turning cold. Faraway voices, occasional distant shouts came like thin grey threads in a black tapestry of silence. Mrs. Hawthorne spoke into that silence. What was the boy really saying with his black sign? Wasn't saying anything, said Jill. Now just a minute, dear. I think he was, even if he didn't know it. Mrs. Hawthorne talked slowly, using the words to shape her thoughts. Once there was an organization to protest the forced contraception bill. I was one of them. We carried signs for hours at a time. We printed leaflets. We stopped people passing so we could talk to them. We gave up our time. We went to considerable trouble and expense because we wanted to get our ideas across. Now, if a man had joined us with a blank sign, he would have been saying something. His sign says he has no opinion. If he joins us, he says that we have no opinion either. He's saying our opinions aren't worth anything. I said, tell him when he wakes up. He can put it in his notebook. But his notebook is wrong. He wouldn't push his blank sign among people he agreed with, would he? Maybe not. I suppose I don't like people with no opinions. Mrs. Hawthorne stood up. She'd been sitting tailor fashion for some hours. Do you know there's a pop machine nearby? There wasn't, of course. No private company would risk getting their machine smashed once or twice a day. But she reminded the rest of us that we were thirsty. Eventually we all got up and trooped away in the direction of the fountain. But blank sign. I like that blank sign gag. How odd, how ominous. It's so basic a freedom of freedom of speech could depend on so slight a thing as a floating cop sign. I was thirsty. The park was bright by city light, crossed by sharp-edged shadows. Such light it seems no one can see much more than he really can. I could see at every shadow, but though there were stirrings all around us, I could see nothing until he moved. We four, sitting under an oak with our backs to the tremendous trunk, must be invisible from any distance. We talked a little. The park was quiet except for occasional laughter from the fountain. I couldn't forget my thirst. I could feel others being thirsty around me. The fountain was right there in the open, a solid block of concrete with 5 men around it. They were dressed in paper shorts with big pockets. They looked alike, like first-string athletes. Maybe they belonged to the same order of frat or ROTC class. They had taken over the fountain. When someone came to get a drink, the tall, osh-blind one would step forward with his arm held stiffly out, palm forward. He had a wide mouth and a grin that might otherwise have been infectious, and a deep, echoing voice. He would intone, go back. Not my pass here, but the immortal Cthulhu, or something equally silly. Trouble was, they weren't kidding. Or they were kidding, but they wouldn't let anyone have a drink. When we arrived, a girl dressed in a towel had been trying to talk some sense into them. It hadn't worked. It might even have boosted their egos. A half-lovely, naked girl begging them for water. Eventually she'd give it up and go away. In that light, her hair might have been red. I hoped it was the girl in the cloak. She sounded healthy, unhurt. And a beefy man in a yellow business jumper had made the mistake of demanding his rights. It was not a night for rights. The blonde kid had goaded him into screaming insults, a stream of unimaginative profanity which ended when he tried to hit the blonde kid. The 3 of them had swarmed over him. The man had left crawling, moaning of police and lawsuits. Why hadn't somebody done something? I'd watched it all from sitting position. I could list my own reasons. 1, it was hard to face the facts that a cop's eye would not capture them both any second now. 2, I didn't like the screaming fat man much. He talked dirty. 3, I'd been waiting for someone else to stop him. That's what the girl in the cloak. Damn it. Mrs. Hawthorne said, well, what time is it? Ron may have been the only man in Kingsbury Park who knew the time. People generally left their valuables in lockers of the entrances. But years ago, when Ron had been flush with money from the sale of the engraved beer bottles, he bought an implant watch. He told time by 1 red mark and 2 red lines going beneath the skin of his wrist. We put the woman between us, but I saw the motion as he glanced at his wrist. 11:45. Don't you think I'll get bored and go away? Been 20 minutes since anyone tried to get a drink, Mrs. Hawthorne said plaintively. Jill shifted against me in the dark. They can't be any more bored than we are. I think they'll get bored and stay anyway. Besides, she stopped. I said, besides that, we're thirsty now. Right. Ron, have you seen any sign of those rock stars you collected? Especially the ones who knocked down the cop's eyes? No. Wasn't surprised. In this darkness? Do you remember his I didn't even finish. Yes, Ron said suddenly. You're kidding. No, his name was Bug Eyes. Don't forget a name like that. I take it he had big bulging eyes? I didn't notice. Well, it's worth a try. I stood and cupped my hands for a megaphone and shouted, Bug Eyes! One of the water monopoly shouted, Let's keep the noise down out there. Bug Eyes! A chorus of remarks from the water monopoly. Trains have it, these peasants. Most of them are just thirsty. This character, from off the side, What do you want? We want to talk to you. Stay where you are. To Ron I said, Come on. To Jill and Mrs. Hawthorne, Stay here. Don't get involved. Moved down to the open space between us and Bug's Eye's voice. 2 of the 5 kids came immediately to intercept it. They must have been bored, all right, looking for action. We ran for it. We reached the shadows of the trees before those 2 reached us. They stopped, laughing like maniacs, and moved back to the fountain. A 14-year-old kid spoke up behind us. Ron? Ron and I were leaning on our bellies in the shadows of the low bushes. Across too much shadowless grass, 4 men in paper shorts stood at parade rest at the 4 corners of the fountain. The 5th man watched for a victim. A boy walked up between us into the moonlight. His eyes were shining, big expressive eyes, maybe a bit too prominent. His hands were big too, with knobbly knuckles. One hand was full of acorns. He pitched them rapidly, one at a time overhand. First one, then another of the water truss twitched and looked in our direction. Bug Eyes kept throwing. Quite suddenly, 2 of them started towards us at a run. Bug Eyes kept throwing until they were almost on it. Then he threw his acorns in a handful and dived into the shadows. The 2 of them ran past us. We let the first go by, the wide-mouthed, blonde spokesman, the expression low and murderous now. The other was short and broad-shouldered, an intimidating silhouette seemingly all muscle. A tackle. I stood in front of him, expecting him to stop in surprise, and he did, and I hit him in the mouth as hard as I could. He stepped back in shock. Ron wrapped an arm around his throat. He bucked. Instantly, Ron hung on. He did something I've seen often enough on television. Linked my fingers and brought both hands down the back of his neck. The blonde spokesman should be back by now, and I turned and he was. He was on me before I could get my hands up. We rolled on the ground, me with my arms pinned to my sides, him unable to use his hands without letting go. It was Lassie planning for both of us. He was squeezing the breath out of me. Ron hovered over us, waiting for his chance to hit him. Suddenly there were others, a lot of others. 3 of them pulled the blonde kid off me, and a beefy bunny man in a yellow business jumper stepped forward and crowned him with a rock. The blonde kid went limp. I was still trying to get my breath. The man squared off and threw a straight left hook with a rock in his hand. The blonde kid's head snapped back, fell forward. I yelled, Hey! Jumped forward, got hold of the arm that held the rock. Someone hit me solidly in the side of the neck. I dropped. Felt like all my strings had been cut. Someone was helping me to my feet. Ron. Voices babbling in whispers, one shouting, Get him. Couldn't see the blonde kid. The other one, the tackle, was up and staggering away. Shadows came from between the trees to pile up on him. The woods were alive, and it was just a little patch of woods, full of angry, thirsty people. Bug Eye reappeared, grinning wildly. Now what? Go somewhere else and try it again? Oh no, it's getting very vicious out tonight. Ron, we've got to stop him. They'll kill him. It's a free park. Can he stand now? Ron, they'll kill him. The rest of the water truss was charging to the rescue. One of them had a tree branch with the leaves stripped off. Behind them, shadows converged on the fountain. We fled. I had to stop after a dozen paces. My head was trying to explode. Ron looked back anxiously, but I waved him on. Behind me, the man with the branch broke through the trees and ran straight toward me to do murder. Behind him, all the noise suddenly stopped. I braced myself for the blow, and fainted. He was lying across my legs, with the branch still in his hand. Jill and Ron were pulling at my shoulder. A pair of golden moons floated overhead. I wriggled loose. I felt my head. Seemed intact. Ron says, The capsize zapped him before he got to you. What about the others? Did he kill them? I don't know. Ron ran his hands through his hair. I was wrong. Anarchy isn't stable. Comes apart too easily. Well, don't do any of our experiments, okay? People were beginning to stand up. They streamed towards the exits, gathering momentum, beneath the yellow gaze of the cop's eyes. The end.